I will admit that I have a little bit of beef with Mr. Hitchcock due to his treatment of his various blondes. The blondes that kind of helped make him famous. He is a good director, but I just have this thing about abusive directors, and like, if you have to abuse the people that you're working with in order to get the performance you want, maybe you're not that great of a director. But I will say that Mr. Hitchcock seemed pretty okay with the gays, if this adaptation's anything to go by. Rope was released in 1948 and was directed by Alfred Hitchcock. The screenplay was written by Arthur Lawrence, and the stars of the movie are Jimmy Stewart, John Daly, and Farley Granger. The play that the movie is based off was released in 1929, and it has the same name. The writer was Patrick Hamilton, a seemingly straight playwright. He also wrote Gaslight, for those that are curious. The events of this movie mostly take place in one room and are supposed to take place in real time. That's a pretty big deal for Hitchcock, who is known for his more memorable and elaborate sets. I'm thinking pretty much everything in Vertigo, and also just Norman Bates' hotel office, which in itself tells its own story. There are just few set pieces that really stick out in this apartment. One is the piano, which is incredibly important to one of the main characters, and two, a dining table covered in books, which is simply just an excuse for three, the chest where they have hidden the body of David, their victim. In the very first scene of this movie, David is strangled to death by his former schoolmates, Philip and Brandon. They use a piece of rope, which is where the name of the movie comes from. Brandon has the genius idea to place him inside of a large wooden chest. They close him inside with the intention of moving his body after the dinner party that they are having that evening. These two main characters were inspired by Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb. In 1924, 4 years before the play had been written, those two murdered a 14-year-old boy named Bobby Franks. Leopold and Loeb did a lot worse to him than our main characters do in this movie, but the motivation is the same. They all thought that they were smart enough to get away with the perfect murder, that killing these people would be easy and getting away with it would be even easier. Brandon and Philip are a little bit more bold, though. They are having a goodbye dinner that night as Philip and Brandon are planning to go away for a while. The story is that Philip is going to be playing the piano somewhere for a while. But it's also a good excuse to get rid of David's body. The centerpiece for the dinner will be the chest. It's being used as a table where the food will be placed for people to enjoy. Everything becomes a little bit more sinister when you realize that everyone coming to this dinner party has some relationship to David. It's even expressed in the credits where they're all connected to David, and that's how they're credited. We have David's father, his aunt, and his fiancée Janet. There is also his former friend Kenneth, who had been dating Janet at some point prior to the start of that relationship. They also invite a teacher that had taught at the school they had all once attended, Rupert Cadell. His invitation is a lot more personal for Brandon and Philip than the others, and I will get into that a little bit later, though. Dinner is being served on the chest, something that pretty much everyone comments on being, super weird. They're using the excuse that they want to show David's father some old books, and the dining table was the best place to do that. Yes, everyone does seem confused by the explanation. It honestly doesn't take that long before people are commenting that it's strange that David isn't there yet. He is normally someone that is very punctual, so him not already being there is concerning his father and his fiancée. David's mother is not there at the party due to illness, but even she is very worried about where he went. The only person that doesn't seem terribly concerned is David's aunt, Anita. She just wants to talk about zodiac signs and be weird, and I do highly respect that. Everything shifts slightly when Rupert, played by Jimmy Stewart, comes to the party. Now, Jimmy Stewart was a very interesting choice to play this character, but he's also kind of like a Hitchcock actor. I guess they were buddies, probably. So yeah, he was a very strange choice, but I just kind of like Jimmy Stewart anyway. The teacher was meant to be someone in their late 20s, and Jimmy Stewart was in his 40s. There's this implication that Brandon might have had feelings for Rupert at some point in the past, but he was certainly inspired by the man to commit the murder. Rupert is taken by the concept of the Ubermensch, also known as Superman. It's meant to be the next level of man, that they're a superior type of human being. The concept was created by Friedrich Nietzsche, and I believe that the book discussing this was released in 1883. As you can imagine, the Nazis went absolutely batshit with the concept. Considering that this movie came out in 1948, this certainly does feel like a commentary on this, which had just been put to rest a few years prior. Rupert begins to discuss his beliefs about the right of the elite to murder those that the elite consider to be inferior. Mr. Kentley is not comfortable with the direction of this conversation and points out the connection to Hitler's beliefs, which is very obviously fair. He gets upset to the point where the conversation just needs to be shifted. And this man has no idea that his son is dead a few feet away from where they're having this conversation due to Rupert's beliefs and the fact that he taught these children, or at the time they were children, about this. But the conversation raises the question as to why they saw David as being inferior to them. His family seems to be elite. If the couple are sharing books with his father, they went to the same school, but they strike me as people that think everyone around them is inferior to them, which is kind of the problem with the concept. Like, by who and how is inferiority measured? The issue for the two seems to be that David was planning on marrying Janet. Apparently, Brandon and Philip were big fans of Kenneth and don't like this change. The drama does lead to a lot of Janet being very salty, and I didn't really like her as a character, but that's beside the point. Brandon is the primary target for this because he won't stop dropping hints, which is definitely adding to how uncomfortable Janet seems. But while Brandon is just coming off as catty and meddling, Philip is an absolute mess. It's a mixture of guilt and being terrified that anyone in that room is going to figure it out. He's mostly going to be playing the piano and drinking very heavily. Rupert has already noticed the tension between the two, but it only becomes more obvious because Brandon cannot keep his mouth shut. He tells the story of when they were at school, when he found Philip strangling rabbits, which is something that Philip had done. This is something that Rupert knows for certain, but for some reason Philip gets up and starts to loudly claim that it was a lie. And that reason is guilt. He's terrified that Brandon is throwing him under the bus. Rupert is becoming increasingly suspicious of what's going on and approaches Philip for a conversation. The pianist is visibly upset, and it's obvious he's the weaker of the two men. Brandon is confident in his ability to get away with this. This is not an opinion that Philip shares. Philip starts to freak out, and there's a brief argument between him and Brandon, an argument that Rupert pops into because he is a fairly relentless character. Brandon is denial that Rupert could be onto them, though, and even if he was, Brandon has twisted things to believe that this man would support what they have done that evening, and to be fair, he did just talk about how murder should be okay. But Rupert is onto them, although he doesn't seem to have quite know what they're going to, what they actually did, he does not know. Just that something has been done, and it definitely has something to do with their missing friend. The dinner party comes to an end when David's mother calls again. She's been calling around this entire evening trying to find out where David might have gone, but nobody has seen him, so there's this concern from everyone that maybe he got hit by a car or something. They just really want to find David. Everyone heads out, and then it's just Brandon and Philip. They need to get ready to leave and to get David out of the apartment. Philip is freaking out again when someone is ringing back up to the apartment. It gets worse when he answers, and it is Rupert. He had apparently left his cigarette case behind and was hoping to grab it. Brandon lets him up, something that Philip is super not happy about. Now obviously Philip has a good reason to be afraid. Rupert had left the cigarette case behind in hopes of getting the chance to talk to the two of them alone. There are too many clues that have been left around, and he can't quite ignore them. The biggest clue that Rupert got was actually when Mrs. Wilson handed him a hat. The hat was not his, but it was David's, which would have been very difficult to do unless David had visited the apartment early that evening, something that Brandon had denied, although apparently that was something David had said he was going to do. He begins to theorize about how they killed David. He notices that Brandon has a gun on him, and he makes no mystery about having spotted it. He wonders if that's how they killed David. But Brandon comes up with a good excuse, in that he brings the gun with him when they go to the country, that's fair. They're able to pretend that everything is fine up until the point that Rupert pulls out the rope. It had stuck out to him as something that was sloppy in the apartment, both in its execution and its placement. Philip is unable to keep his shit together and starts to freak out. He's completely unable to hold his emotions in. Everything that he had felt that evening starts to bubble up. Philip gets his hand on the gun and it goes off into the ground after a struggle with Rupert. Rupert seems unfazed by a lot of what's happening, and I think this is kind of how Jimmy Stewart appears most of the time, just not bothered, which he's usually a man's man actor, so it makes sense for that to be kind of how he appears through most of this movie. But he's a good enough actor that the stoicism disappears the second that he opens the chest and discovers David's dead body. He clearly did not believe that he was right. It is a shock to him when the body is there. Brandon tells him why they did it, and he is shocked that they are throwing his words back into his face. He claims that his words took on a meaning that he never intended. And honestly, this is more the consequences of his actions than anything else. He might have been using murder as a thought experiment with his students, but he was also encouraging them to believe that they were so smart for having the conversation that he never thought to recognize there might be consequences to encouraging rich white men to do what they want, including murder. Rupert goes over to the window and shoots the gun into the air. The police are arriving as the movie ends. Brandon and Philip both seem shocked by the way that the night had turned out. It is also fascinating to me that they were able to get away with so much gay stuff in this movie, because there are quite a few moments where I'm like, you guys got this past the Hays Code censorship? I'm a little impressed. All the actors are fantastic. They do a great job in a minimal setting and limited time to flesh out each scene. Jimmy Stewart is always going to be a standout in whatever he is doing. I can see a bit of the original character from the play, just a lot more heterosexual. That isn't to say that I didn't enjoy the interactions between Rupert and Miss Wilson. They were fun together. The main characters are people that think they're smarter than everyone else. They don't value other people. It's questionable if they even value one another, because Brandon saw Philip repeatedly freaking out, and he's just like, okay, we'll just keep on doing this. Brandon kind of just seemed to want to see people that loved David suffering and wondering what happened to him. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Amanda. This has been Horror Historian. Next month, I will be covering Wreck and a few other movies, but I'm really excited about Wreck. I think I got Quarantine on there too, but that'll be a separate video because it is... I saw Quarantine before I saw Wreck, which is almost tragic. Because I said this is the same movie, but anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this. I do have some links down below. My Twitter, I don't really use it that much. My TikTok, which I do use much. And my Ko-fi, which if you would like to give me a couple dollars, I would appreciate that. Yeah. I don't think I'd be invited to this dinner party, so I'm really not that concerned about surviving rope. I don't have any rich friends, so it's not really a concern.